I'm joined by economist Sifiso Skenjana. So you have the view of Cosatu, emphatically stated this afternoon by Tony Ehrenreich in the Western Cape, basically forcefully saying that this is the way to go. Eskom is in trouble. If Eskom goes belly up, we all are in trouble as a country. Therefore, let's do this. And then you have Fedusa saying, not a good idea, don't do it. Where do you stand?
You certainly shouldn't do it as a starting point, just to get it out the way. But I think, the certain conversations that must not be conflated. The conversation around the use of prescribed assets is one conversation, and then a conversation around the restructure of the debt position of Eskom, I think, is another conversation. And I think sometimes, the utterances take a conversation that may have merit, and may need additional exploration, which is a prescribed assets conversation, and they water it down with saying, let's use that to pay off debt. And so if you just look at around, for example, pension funds and the mandate of pension assets, is that we want to grow those assets over time to the benefit of the workers, right? And so to use that to go pay off debt or to capitalize a debt position is certainly not a constructive way in terms of growing the pension base, as well as also we know that there are legal frameworks that determine how pension fund monies are utilized, and there's Regulation 28 that creates bounds and variables that will inform just how much you can invest depending on the asset class. And so all of these things that make it, unsensical to even make, such a proposal.
But Sifiso, the insistence is that there will be no losses to, the workers who are members of the government employees pension fund, which via the PIC manages some good 2 trillion rand in assets. There'll be no losses. We are told that these are guaranteed and backed up by government and by extension by the taxpayer.
So, first and foremost, the pension funds are already invested in Eskom through the bonds, right? And they're able to then recoup some interest rate on the back of that. And also your guarantee is as good as the person guaranteeing, right? And so as soon as, for example, South Africa goes into junk, that can wholly alter the conversation around what is bankable and guaranteeable in the context of just saying it's guaranteed. And two, over and above that, it's not just about not losing money. It's about growing pension fund assets in a prudent and sustainable way.
But you just said they have bonds at an interest rate. So therefore, I don't imagine that Cosatu would be saying this without thinking about what's in it for the workers. How do they help this money grow?
No, so we're saying that pension assets are already utilized by Eskom as a capital base, as loans in essence, through the bond market. And therefore, for them to be even more exposed in terms of how much capital they're allocating to that business is not prudent. Just by virtue of trying to manage the portfolio of investments where pension fund assets go. And that's the conversation we're trying to have, is that whichever way you want to slice this thing, whether you're looking at IDC or DBSA or PIC, any or GEPF, which comes under the PIC, any of those, sources of funds have got material constraints for them to be able to do this. Simple.
So what's the option then? I heard you earlier on juxtaposing the two conversations, the one about using the pension funds by way of, advancing money to pay off the debt, and the prescribed assets conversation. Are you in favor of that one at least?
Well, and not prescribed assets in the context of Eskom, I think there's room, as I said, to explore how a prescribed assets policy framework could be built into the system, and that would need to determine the kind of assets that we invest in, and that would need to be aligned again with the growth imperatives of pension assets. As we speak, for example, as I said, there are prudential regulations, there are prudential limits that say, for example, up to 5% can be invested in alternative assets, which means that it's only a small portion that can be at risk, if you can call it that, in terms of the kind of investment, but also that's the investment that's got to be juxtaposed to your expected return on that. And I think solving for the Eskom issue is certainly, again, not the way to go about it using pension assets.
But where do we look, Sifiso, as a last question to you, for creative solutions? It's a huge chunk of government debt, what Eskom owes. The exposure there is 450 billion rand. And we're always told that if they were to ever default, we are in serious trouble. We'd almost be in a situation like Greece was in about a decade or so ago.
Sure. I mean, the Eskom issue is complex. One of the challenges facing Eskom that Eskom is a cost recovery mechanism, and therefore they need a tariff that is cost-reflective tariff. And that tariff is still, not the tariff that they're able to collect right now. And
so NESA didn't help them today. So the court, rather, with that judgment. That's just it doesn't quite help them because, as far as where we are right now in the economy, they're still not getting a cost-reflective tariff. That's the starting point. And so it means already their operating model means that they're continuing going to need to borrow just to recover their costs, and that's a problematic issue in of itself. And then we talk about issues of energy mixes and all of those things, and I think for me we certainly need to look at how Eskom diversifies its own energy mix as a utility, because then it's getting cheaper to create other forms of energy, and therefore that cost-reflective tariff starts to become smaller over time. And I think for me it's around figuring out how do you optimize the business model at Eskom, and yes, it will take some time. Let's talk about what it means to have a stage 2 load shedding for 18 months. As long as business can predict when it's going to happen, then they can plan around it and then optimize and start to fix the operational challenges that make it very difficult for the capital structure at Eskom to turn around. So thank you so much for coming through. For a moment there I was worried that you were advocating for higher tariffs on consumers. You were not, were you?
Certainly not.
All right, Sfiso Skenjana, an economist, helping us make sense of the proposal by Cosatu to use some of the pension funds of government employees to sort of pay off a portion of Eskom's debt.